Week 2 of Sean Diddy Combs' federal sex trafficking trial pulled back the curtain even further on what prosecutors claim is a decades-long criminal enterprise hidden beneath the glittering surface of hip-hop royalty. With the courtroom packed and public scrutiny intensifying, testimony this week didn't just add to what Cassie Ventura laid bare in Week 1. It cracked open new layers of alleged complicity, control, and institutionalized abuse. Each witness brought forth a unique, harrowing window into Wims' private world, a world prosecutors allege was governed by fear, violence, manipulation, and sex-fueled rituals. Thank you to all our new subscribers for joining us on this journey. If you're new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on those post notifications so you don't miss out on any updates as this trial unfolds. Your support means everything to us, and hitting that like button and leaving a comment greatly helps our channel reach more people. Let us know your thoughts about the trial in the comments below. We appreciate your engagement. Dawn Richards' testimony on day 6 of the federal trial against Sean Diddy Combs marked a pivotal shift in tone, grounding the prosecution's case in first-hand observations of violence, coercion, and the silencing culture allegedly fostered by the defendant. Richard, best known as a former member of the girl group Danity Kane, which Combs helped form through his MTV show Making the Band, was not merely a celebrity witness. She was someone who once lived under Combs' roof and within his inner circle. Her testimony wasn't speculative, it was personal, direct, and deeply unsettling. On the stand, Richard recalled a specific and violent encounter that occurred in 2009. She stated that while at a hotel in Los Angeles, she witnessed Combs physically assault Cassie. He allegedly grabbed Ventura by her hair and dragged her up a staircase. Richard's voice, described in courtroom notes as steady but emotional, did not waver as she detailed how Ventura was crying, visibly shaken, and utterly powerless in that moment. Richard said she had never seen anything like it before. What struck her more than the physical assault itself was the emotional aftermath, the silence, the fear, and the way people in the entourage acted as though nothing had happened. This was a culture, she testified, where everyone knew not to speak out. Combs allegedly made it clear to Richard and others that speaking up came with consequences. She recalled him warning in front of multiple witnesses that, open quote, people could go missing, close quote. Richard said she understood this as a veiled death threat, and it worked, and she remained silent for years. In addition to the 2009 incident, Richard recounted a broader pattern of abuse and manipulation. She testified that Cassie was often left isolated, emotionally diminished, and physically injured. Richard said she remembered multiple occasions where Ventura appeared with black eyes, bruises, or injuries she tried to conceal with makeup. What added to the weight of Richard's testimony was the context she provided about her own silence. She admitted she was scared, not just of Combs, but of what telling the truth might cost her career. She described an environment where people were either rewarded for staying loyal or removed if they questioned anything. This testimony painted a picture of an enterprise not only fueled by power and money, but maintained through fear and institutionalized silence. On cross-examination, Combs' attorneys attempted to poke holes in Richard's testimony. They questioned why she waited so long to speak and whether she had any personal grievances with Combs. Richard stood firm. She explained that her silence was part of the same coercive system that kept others quiet too. Only after seeing the criminal investigation unfold did she feel safe enough to testify. Her testimony added a crucial layer to the prosecution's narrative, that Combs' alleged abuse wasn't just private or hidden, it was witnessed, and those who saw it felt too afraid to intervene. Dawn Richards' courage to testify may have opened the door for others to come forward, reinforcing the prosecution's theory that this case is not just about individual acts of abuse, but a culture of control, fear, and silence that allowed them to flourish. Kerry Morgan, Cassie Ventura's former best friend, delivered gripping and emotionally loaded testimony on day 6 of the federal trial against Diddy. Subpoenaed to testify, Morgan stepped onto the witness stand not as someone eager to speak, but as someone compelled to tell what she had witnessed over the years while closely connected to Cassie. Her account reinforced a recurring theme of systemic abuse and control, added to the prosecution's tapestry of lived experience that now formed the backbone of their racketeering case. Morgan began by recounting the early days of Cassie's relationship with Combs. She stated that things quickly escalated from public glamour to private terror. One of the most telling episodes she shared occurred in Los Angeles, where Combs allegedly attacked Cassie in a hotel room in full view of his security detail. According to Morgan, Combs punched Cassie in the face and knocked her down. She cried out, but no one intervened. One of the security guards, when Megan begged him to step in, allegedly shrugged and said, open quote, "You know I can't do that," close quote. This moment stuck with her. It exemplified how Combs' inner circle was conditioned, whether through intimidation, loyalty, or employment dependence, to tolerate or ignore violent behavior. Another significant episode Morgan recounted happened in Jamaica. According to her, Combs flew a group of friends to the island for what was supposed to be a luxurious retreat. Instead, it turned into another scene of violence. Morgan described hearing yelling from inside a villa and then seeing Combs emerge, dragging Cassie by her hair. Cassie, Morgan testified, was visibly shaken and no one present dared to confront Combs. She said Cassie later told her, open quote, "He gets like that sometimes," close quote. Morgan also recalled another violent encounter involving a door and a hammer. During a heated argument, she testified Combs allegedly used a hammer to try and break down a door behind which Cassie had locked herself. Morgan said Cassie was terrified. At the time, she had no tools, neither legal recourse nor a support system to escape the grip of someone as powerful as Combs. Morgan didn't just limit her testimony to Cassie's experience. She described an incident where she herself was physically assaulted. She stated that during a disagreement, Combs struck her with a wooden hanger and grabbed her neck. She didn't go to the police, she said, because she feared retaliation and didn't believe anyone would hold Combs accountable. In response to the prosecution's questions, Morgan offered an insight into the psychological hold Combs had on Cassie. She described Cassie as someone who had moments of resolve but would always go back, an emotional cycle consistent with the expert testimony of Dr. Dawn Hughes, who explained earlier in the week how victims of abuse often develop trauma bonds with their abusers. On cross-examination, the defense attempted to challenge Morgan's motives and questioned why she had remained silent for so long. Morgan replied that she'd been scared. She said she felt guilty for not doing more to help Cassie, but emphasized that Combs' influence was far-reaching and speaking out was not a simple act. Kerry Morgan's testimony underscored the psychological climate around Sean Combs, a world where violence was normalized, where bystanders were paralyzed by either fear or loyalty, and where even close friends of victims were rendered powerless. Her account did not stand alone. It linked directly to the testimonies before and after her, building a coherent picture of an alleged enterprise held together not just by money, but by fear and silence. Regina Ventura, the mother of Cassie, testified on day 7 of the Diddy trial, and in doing so became one of the prosecution's most emotionally resonant witnesses. Her presence, understated and maternal, cut through the courtroom with a chilling sense of familiarity. She wasn't a celebrity or industry figure. She was a mother, a woman whose daughter, she believes, was systemically abused and exploited by one of the most powerful men in music. Her testimony served not just as an emotional anchor, but as a legal reinforcement of the prosecution's core argument that Sean Combs exercised total control over Cassie, physically, financially, emotionally, and that this control extended to those around her, including family. Regina began by confirming that she first met Combs in 2006 after Cassie signed to Bad Boy Records. What began as a business relationship evolved into something more personal, and Cassie moved to Los Angeles with Combs. Regina said she was initially unaware of the full scope of what was happening in the relationship, but that over time, troubling signs began to emerge. One of the most impactful pieces of evidence introduced during her testimony was a December 2011 message from Cassie. In this message, Cassie told her mother that Combs had threatened to release a sex tape and harm both her and her then partner Kid Cudi, or Scott Muscudi. The message also revealed that Combs had demanded $20,000 from Regina and her husband, allegedly to quote-unquote recoup losses incurred during Cassie's romantic involvement with Cudi. Regina testified that they took out a loan to pay the money, open quote, for the safety of my daughter, close quote. This was a visceral moment in court. The financial extortion and emotional blackmail described by a parent who felt she had no other option. Regina also presented photographic evidence of Cassie's injuries, images she took herself. These photos, introduced into the court record, depicted visible bruises and facial injuries that Regina claimed were inflicted by Combs. While previous testimony spoke of violence, these images, paired with her mother's words, made it impossible to deny the physical toll the relationship had taken. Then came her recollection of an August 2016 altercation, where she personally called the police on Combs. She stated that Combs had stolen Cassie's phone during a heated argument outside her apartment building in Los Angeles. The argument escalated with Combs allegedly stealing Cassie's car, a Jaguar, and driving off. Regina said that D-Rock, real name Damian Butler, Combs' longtime associate and alleged enforcer, stood between her and Combs during the confrontation. When she tried to strike D-Rock out of frustration, he didn't retaliate. A crucial permutation from this testimony lies in law enforcement's involvement. The fact that police were called and yet no formal charges appear to have been laid speaks to the broader theme that prosecution is building, a system of impunity surrounding Combs. The argument isn't just that he committed abuse, it's that he had the means, the reputation, and the infrastructure to neutralize consequences. Regina's testimony adds weight to that assertion. She also recalled an incident in Combs' kitchen where a female employee named Maya was laughing during a casual conversation. Combs allegedly turned to Maya and demanded to know why she was laughing. According to Regina, Maya stopped instantly and looked quote-unquote plain, as though she had been reprimanded for merely expressing joy. This anecdote, while seemingly small, emphasized the psychological domination Combs allegedly held over those in his home. Notably, the defense did not cross-examine Regina Ventura. The decision may have been strategic. Perhaps they believed challenging a mother testifying about her daughter's abuse would backfire with the jury, but that silence also allowed her account to stand unchallenged, uninterrupted, and emotionally intact. In legal terms, Regina's testimony offered first-hand corroboration of threats, coercion, and financial extortion, all consistent with the government's charges of sex trafficking and racketeering. From a narrative standpoint, her presence humanized Cassie's experience beyond what Cassie herself was able to provide in week one. It added generational depth, showing the far-reaching implications of abuse, not just on the victim, but on their family. The permutation of Regina Ventura's testimony extended far beyond the courtroom. It challenged jurors to consider the real-world consequences of unchecked power, of fear that silences even a mother, and of a system where the victims and their families are cornered into compliance just to stay safe. It painted Sean Combs not just as an alleged abuser, but as someone who exerted such total dominance that even the people who loved Cassie most felt powerless to intervene, and in doing so, it made the case against him that much harder to ignore. Sheree Hayes, a male exotic dancer and escort, took the stand on day 7 of the Diddy trial and gave one of the most graphic and damning testimonies yet. His testimony not only corroborated the recurring pattern of abuse and control alleged by other witnesses, but also revealed disturbing details about the so-called quote-unquote freak-offs, ritualistic sexual events prosecutors argue were a central mechanism of Combs' alleged criminal enterprise. Hayes began by describing how he came into Diddy's orbit. He said he was hired through a third-party connection to participate in private sexual events for Combs. At first, Hayes said he thought this was a simple gig, well-paying and discreet. But what he described was far from transactional. He painted a picture of ritualized sexual exploitation orchestrated by Combs, where power dynamics, emotional control, and psychological manipulation took center stage. According to Hayes, these events typically took place in high-end hotel suites. The rooms were dimly lit, often filled with candles, and always meticulously staged. There were large bowls of baby oil and dozens of bottles of Astroglide lubricant, items mirrored in the physical evidence seized from Combs' Star Island mansion. Hayes said he was specifically instructed not to make eye contact with Combs and to take directions only from him. During these sessions, he testified, Cassie Ventura was always present, sometimes participating under visible distress. Hayes described her as withdrawn, disassociative, and emotionally absent. She rarely spoke. At times, Combs would film the events, directing them like a movie. Hayes said these recordings felt less like private mementos and more like control mechanisms, something the prosecution subtly argued could have been used to blackmail or manipulate participants. What made Hayes' testimony particularly compelling was how it aligned with expert witness Dr. Don Hughes' earlier explanation of trauma bonding and coercion. Hayes said he saw no signs that Cassie wanted to be there. He described her compliance as mechanical, void of consent in any meaningful sense. In legal terms, this distinction matters. Consent under coercion is not consent at all. He also testified that these sessions could last for hours. They weren't spontaneous or casual, they were structured. Combs would sometimes direct the angles, change positions, or stop the session entirely to make adjustments. Hayes emphasized that these were not orgies or consensual group sex acts. They were, in his view, performances arranged for Combs' gratification and psychological dominance. Under cross-examination, Combs' defense team attempted to frame Hayes' participation as voluntary and possibly even opportunistic. They questioned whether he was paid fairly, whether he continued participating over a period of time, and whether he was now testifying for personal gain. Hayes stood firm. He said he kept returning because he feared professional consequences and because he needed the money, but he clarified that fear, not enthusiasm, kept him involved. Open quote. You do what you have to do when someone that powerful asks, close quote, he said. The permutation of Hayes' testimony are substantial. For one, it offers corroborative detail to Cassie Ventura's own descriptions of being forced into sexually degrading situations. But more than that, Hayes' account gives jurors a visual and procedural understanding of how Combs allegedly operated, down to the lighting in the rooms and the products on the table. This level of detail makes the prosecution's theory of organized sex trafficking feel less theoretical and more documentary. It also reinforces the racketeering charge. Prosecutors must show that Combs was not just committing isolated acts of abuse, but was running a system, a repeatable, orchestrated structure designed to exploit others. Hayes' description of repeated sessions, instruction protocols, and camera documentation helps to build that framework. Finally, Hayes' testimony humanizes the invisible participants in these sessions, those whose stories may never be told. He stood as one of them and told the court that this was not just sex, it was domination, performance, and exploitation. By the time he left the witness stand, there was little doubt about the weight of his words. His testimony tied together the sexual, psychological, and logistical threads of the prosecution's case, making it increasingly difficult for the jury to dismiss the argument that Sean Combs did not merely engage in abusive behavior, he institutionalized it. George Kaplan, who served as Diddy's executive assistant between 2013 and 2015, took the stand on day 8 and 9 of the federal trial, offering damning testimony that bridged the personal, professional, and operational aspects of Combs' alleged criminal conduct. Kaplan's presence was subdued, but his words were explosive, laying bare the infrastructure behind the scenes of Combs' empire and illuminating how his staff, knowingly or not, became facilitators of what prosecutors argue was a well-oiled machine of abuse and coercion. No pun intended. Kaplan started by explaining the structure of Combs Enterprises, a conglomerate of fashion, spirits, and media ventures where he worked under the chief operating officer before becoming Combs' direct executive assistant. He explained his job in no uncertain terms, open quote, to manage Mr. Combs' life, close quote. This included setting up hotel rooms, carrying cash, transporting sensitive items, and sometimes, as his testimony revealed, covering up signs of physical abuse. One of the most disturbing episodes Kaplan recounted took place on a private jet en route to Las Vegas. He described hearing glass shattering during an argument between Combs and Cassie. Cassie retreated to the back of the jet. After the incident, Combs asked Kaplan to retrieve witch hazel and other creams to conceal visible bruises on her face. Kaplan paid for these with a corporate credit card. When asked on the stand why he didn't intervene or speak out, Kaplan's voice wavered, quote unquote, my career. Another key incident took place at Combs' Star Island mansion involving Combs and another woman, Gina. Kaplan testified that Combs threw green apples at Gina with significant force. He said he was later instructed to bring a medical bag into the room but was told to leave quickly. From outside, Kaplan said he heard Gina screaming near the gate and male voices, presumably Combs' security, intervening. In both scenarios, Kaplan said he reported the incidents to Christina Karam, or KK, Combs' chief of staff, and told her he would resign, and he ultimately did, saying, open quote, I couldn't stand behind that behavior, close quote. Kaplan also provided insight into how Combs handled cash and logistics. He carried tens of thousands of dollars in Combs' private jet, retrieved cash from Western Union, and knew of Combs' preference for paying expenses in cash, particularly expenses related to his personal life. When asked if Combs tracked who paid for what, like baby oil or drugstore purchases, Kaplan said no, open quote, he didn't care, close quote. Prosecutors used Kaplan's testimony to illustrate Combs' ability to insulate himself through a network of assistants and enablers, many of whom, like Kaplan, executed tasks without full knowledge of their broader implications. But Kaplan's emotional responses during cross-examination, especially his visible guilt over not intervening when Cassie was hurt, showed that the silence wasn't necessarily born from apathy. It was born from a toxic hierarchy. On cross-examination, Combs' attorney sought to undercut Kaplan's reliability, emphasizing his continued employment despite alleged abuse and pointing out that he described his experience working for Combs as quote-unquote complicated. They asked about his access to surveillance footage, questioned inconsistencies, and highlighted his close proximity to Combs during milestone events like the launch of Revolt TV and business trips with Diageo executives. Yet Kaplan held firm. His words weren't speculative, they were procedural. He wasn't testifying about a moment, he was testifying about a pattern, repeated incidents of violence, cover-ups, and moral erosion. One of the key permutations of Kaplan's testimony is that it positions Combs' alleged criminality within a corporate infrastructure. Kaplan wasn't a bodyguard or a club promoter. He was an executive assistant with access to corporate credit cards, travel manifests, and human resource level insight. His testimony helps prosecutors substantiate the racketeering charge, which requires showing that Combs directed or managed a criminal enterprise over time. Kaplan's role wasn't to tell the jury what happened in hotel rooms behind closed doors. It was to explain how everything outside those rooms made those moments possible, how flights were booked, money was moved, victims were pacified, and bruises were covered. As he left the stand, Kaplan admitted he never received a response from Combs when he invited him to his wedding. It was a small detail, but in a trial about control and silence, it was symbolic. Even those who helped build the empire were ultimately disposable. Scott Muscati, known globally as Kid Cudi, delivered one of the most emotionally volatile and narratively explosive testimonies of the trial on day 9. His account didn't just support allegations of abuse levied by Cassie, it expanded the implications of Combs' alleged behavior into the realm of threats, intimidation, and violent retaliation against perceived rivals. For prosecutors, Muscati's testimony wasn't merely corroborative, it was cinematic. And for the jury, it may have redefined what they were being asked to consider, not just whether Sean Combs abused one woman, but whether he ran a fear-based empire. Muscati took the stand in a leather jacket and jeans, a reminder that celebrity doesn't protect you from trauma. He testified that he and Cassie began dating in 2011 after she and Combs had seemingly broken up. Almost immediately, Muscati said he began to feel pressure. Cassie told him she was afraid. Then one morning around 5:30 or 6 a.m., she called him in distress. She claimed that Combs had discovered their relationship and that she feared for her safety. Muscati picked her up and brought her to the Sunset Marquis Hotel to lay low. This was his first real experience with what he described as Combs' threatening presence. That same day, Muscati testified, his home was broken into. His dog, who normally roamed freely, was found locked in the bathroom. Gifts had been opened, items were moved, security cameras had been repositioned. Nothing was stolen, but everything about the break-in felt targeted and invasive. Prosecutors asked if he suspected who was responsible. Muscati did not hesitate. Open quote, Sean Combs, close quote. He later learned from Capricorn Clark, an associate of Combs, that Combs had forced her into a car and brought her near Muscati's residence. This, Muscati said, confirmed his suspicion that Combs had orchestrated the break-in. He called the police, but said he didn't pursue further legal action because of fear and disbelief that it would make a difference. But that wasn't the end of it. Soon after, Muscati's Porsche was firebombed with a Molotov cocktail. The dog's babysitter had called to report the damage. When Muscati arrived, the roof had been slashed open and the vehicle charred. Photographs of the car were introduced as evidence. Muscati told the court, open quote, I knew it was him, close quote. Though he had no direct proof, the timing, the threat, and the circumstances all pointed to one person in his mind, Combs. Prosecutors asked Muscati about his reaction. Open quote, I wanted to fight him. This crossed the line, close quote, he said. He called Combs, who answered calmly, saying, open quote, I'm over here waiting for you, close quote. Muscati said the way Combs spoke, unbothered, collected, was haunting. He later described Combs as, open quote, standing there like a Marvel supervillain, close quote, when they eventually met face-to-face at Soho House. Combs offered him water and told him, open quote, you know that's my girl, close quote. Muscati replied, open quote, I thought y'all had broken up, close quote. Muscati testified that Cassie had told him about Combs' abuse, including being hit and kicked. However, she never mentioned sexual abuse. Still, the violence was enough to make him worry deeply for her safety. He said she seemed quote-unquote depressed, jittery, and just really shook. On cross-examination, Combs' attorney, Brian Steele, tried to minimize Muscati's credibility. He asked if Cassie had quote-unquote played him. Muscati responded with honesty, open quote, yes, close quote. He acknowledged that their relationship had ended and that Cassie had stopped contacting him. Steele tried to frame the break-in and the car fire as speculative, no security footage, no DNA proof, no charges filed. He even pointed out that DNA found on the Molotov cocktail was from a female. Muscati admitted he didn't know who left the DNA, but emphasized that the pattern of harassment still pointed clearly to Combs. The defense also tried to suggest that Muscati, as a man of strength and celebrity himself, was exaggerating the fear he felt, but Muscati rebutted this with emotional clarity, open quote, this crossed the line, close quote. Prosecutors returned with a redirect to reinforce what mattered, the fear Cassie expressed, the timing of the break-in, the coordinated manipulation of people like Capricorn Clark, and the retaliation that followed. The permutations of Muscati's testimony are broad and chilling. It provided narrative continuity to Cassie's claims that Combs controlled her through violence and intimidation. It introduced the idea that Combs was willing to use property destruction as psychological warfare. It supported the racketeering charge by showing targeted retaliation against rivals, suggesting Combs maintained control not just over his victims but over his environment. Moreover, Muscati's testimony showed how Combs allegedly operated in public and private spaces simultaneously, destroying a car one day, shaking hands in a Hollywood lounge the next. This duality, a violent man cloaked in charm, could be what seals the image prosecutors want the jury to retain. When Muscati left the stand, the emotional atmosphere in the courtroom had changed. This wasn't just about internal domestic abuse anymore. It was about power, control, and terror projected outward, about making sure no one crossed the line, and if they did, they'd pay for it. As week 2 of the Diddy trial came to a close, prosecutors signaled that the momentum built through emotionally charged testimonies and damning corroborations is far from slowing down. Day 10 is expected to continue shaping the narrative of Combs as a man who did not operate in isolation but allegedly built an ecosystem of fear, exploitation, and retaliation. While the government has yet to reveal its full witness lineup for tactical and safety reasons, especially given concerns about potential witness intimidation, Several signals point to the continued escalation of evidentiary weight and narrative tension in the days ahead. On day 9, the prosecution revealed that it was preparing to call Cassie Ventura's long-term makeup artist Milo Morales. Although Morales was briefly introduced at the end of the day, her testimony is expected to resume in full on day 10. According to a preliminary exchange, Morales worked with Cassie from 2007 through the COVID-19 pandemic and considered her quote-unquote like a sister. Her role in the trial is significant because she witnessed Cassie during multiple high-profile events, including a Grammy weekend in 2010 when she allegedly observed visible bruises on Cassie's face. Morales is expected to provide key visual and behavioral evidence, what Cassie looked like, how she moved, and what she said before and after incidents where abuse was suspected. If photographs or red carpet appearances align with her testimony about injuries, it could serve as circumstantial visual evidence that supports Ventura's and others' claims of chronic physical abuse. Additionally, the prosecution appears to be building toward the testimony of other industry insiders and former employees, individuals who may not have experienced abuse directly but were in close enough proximity to observe the mood, behavior, or post-incident aftermath. This includes stylists, drivers, and possibly additional medical professionals. There's also a growing speculation that the government could soon introduce forensic analysis from the items seized during the Homeland Security raid of Combs' residence on Star Island and in Los Angeles. This could include lab-confirmed drug residue, the contents of electronic devices, or digital trail evidence, text messages, photos, or video clips that may demonstrate a pattern of behavior or communication around the so-called quote-unquote freak-offs. The introduction of such digital evidence could serve a dual purpose: one, to corroborate previous witness accounts, especially from Sheree Hayes, David James, and George Kaplan, and two, to establish Combs' direct involvement in orchestrating or documenting the acts in question, potentially reinforcing the racketeering element of the case. Day 10 may also see renewed pushback from the defense, with the prosecution gaining steam and public interest intensifying. Combs' attorneys are likely to ramp up cross-examinations, possibly questioning the motives, consistencies, and timelines of witnesses who have so far remained largely unshaken. Finally, the court could see prosecutorial developments regarding immunity agreements and sealed exhibits, particularly if the government intends to call witnesses who are still actively connected to the music industry or Combs' broader network. Any such witnesses could further complicate the legal web around Combs, potentially implicating others or revealing how deeply the alleged enterprise was embedded in his business operations. In summary, Day 10 is shaping up to be another critical juncture in the case. The prosecution's approach, slowly stitching together first-hand trauma, operational logistics, and forensic footprints, is closing gaps in the narrative. What began as Cassie's testimony has now become a networked indictment of Sean Combs' alleged abuse of power, and Day 10 will likely continue tightening that noose. As week 2 of the Diddy trial draws to a close, the threads of witness testimony, logistical corroboration, and emotional trauma are beginning to form a harrowing tapestry. We've heard from people who lived with fear, who stayed silent for years, and who've now come forward under oath to share stories that may change the course of this trial. From Cassie's mother painting a portrait of parental desperation to Scott Muscati reliving the terror from Molotov cocktail attack and former assistants detailing how bruises were covered and cash was moved, this week has not been about isolated events. It's been about a system, allegedly orchestrated and enforced by Sean Combs, designed to control, exploit, and silence. And yet, we're only halfway through. If the first 2 weeks are any indication, what lies ahead may only deepen the shock and reveal more layers of the alleged enterprise. If you found this coverage valuable and believe in the importance of shedding light on such crucial issues, please hit the subscribe button and turn on those post notifications. Your support helps amplify these voices, spreading awareness and fostering meaningful conversations. Don't forget to like this video and leave your thoughts in the comment below. Your engagement makes a difference. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned as we continue to closely follow every development in this critical trial. Lastly, visit our news website, switcherpost.co.za, for the best explainers on every important event happening around you. No agenda, just the story.